April 10th, 1945, 09:15 hours. Outskirts of Gyor, Western Hungary. The morning fog still clung to the ruins of the small village when Sergeant William Carter raised his hand for his squad to halt. They'd been following the faint sound of crying for the last half-mile, through streets littered with burnt carts, collapsed roofs, and the occasional helmet half buried in mud. The sound came again, soft, distant, unmistakably human. Carter motioned toward a bombed-out schoolhouse, its roof gone, one wall barely standing. Inside, amid the shattered desks and the smell of damp wood, 4 children huddled together. The oldest couldn't have been more than 13. The smallest, a girl, clutched a broken doll missing both arms. None of them spoke when the soldiers entered. They didn't run, didn't scream, just stared with wide, hollow eyes that had seen too much. Corporal James "Jimmy" O'Connor lowered his rifle first. "Jesus, Bill, they're just kids." The words barely came out as more than a whisper. Carter nodded, stepping forward slowly, careful not to frighten them. The children flinched when he reached into his pocket, but he only pulled out a chocolate bar, half melted from his pack. He broke it into pieces and laid them on the floor. After a long pause, the smallest girl reached out and took one. That tiny movement, hesitant, trembling, was the first spark of trust in a world that had given them none. In the final months of the Second World War, Western Hungary had become a wasteland of despair, entire villages erased by retreating German troops and advancing Soviet artillery. Among the rubble were tens of thousands of children, orphans of war, abandoned by both fate and country. Many had watched their parents executed, their homes burned, their siblings dragged away. Others had wandered alone for weeks, surviving on scraps, too frightened to speak to strangers. The American 26th Infantry Division, known as the Yankee Division, had entered Hungary as liberators, but what they found felt nothing like victory. The bodies of war lay not only in trenches and ruined towns, but in the eyes of these children who no longer remembered what safety felt like. Private Robert Harris wrote in his journal on April 15th, "We've seen everything, bombs, bullets, burned cities, but nothing haunts me like those orphans. The way they look at us, like they're waiting for the next bad thing to happen. You want to promise them it's over, but how do you promise that when even we don't know what tomorrow looks like?" The humanitarian crisis that followed Germany's collapse didn't stop at its borders. Across Eastern Europe, tens of thousands of Hungarian, Polish, and Romanian orphans flooded into temporary camps, often sick, starved, and too traumatized to speak. Relief organizations were overwhelmed. The Red Cross documented entire trains arriving at collection points with nothing but children aboard, some too weak to walk. American soldiers stationed in occupied territories faced a moral question they'd never been trained to answer. What do you do when victory leaves behind an army of the innocent? Carter's squad couldn't walk away. Over the next few days, they brought food, blankets, and medical supplies to the abandoned schoolhouse. The children started to speak in broken words, Hungarian mixed with fragments of German. One name kept surfacing, Anna Kovacs, the eldest, 13 years old, fiercely protective of her siblings. When she finally trusted them enough to talk, she explained that their parents had been executed by German officers for sheltering a Jewish family. The youngest, her sister, hadn't spoken since that day. When headquarters ordered the division to move north, Carter couldn't bring himself to leave them. He made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Carter's request to stay behind was denied twice before he stopped asking for permission and simply acted. He arranged for Anna and her siblings to be brought to a temporary field station near Lake Balaton, where the division's medics treated the sick and displaced. It wasn't an official orphanage, but within days it started to feel like one. Soldiers who'd once carried rifles now carried blankets. They built makeshift cribs from supply crates, used tin cups for feeding, and converted ration tins into toys. The laughter that occasionally returned from the children's tents felt like an alien sound in a landscape that had forgotten joy. News spread quickly among the soldiers, a group of American men looking after Hungarian orphans. At first, the officers didn't know what to make of it. The army manual said nothing about childcare in war zones, but the commanding officer, Colonel Whitman, visited the site himself and left without saying much. The next morning, crates of powdered milk and chocolate rations arrived with a handwritten note that simply said, "Continue." What began as a handful of children soon grew into dozens. Soldiers found them in barns, hiding in forests, wandering aimlessly along roads. Some were too weak to stand. Some didn't remember their names. They were fed, cleaned, clothed, and given a chance, something they hadn't had in years. For the American men who had lost their humanity in endless combat, caring for these children became a form of redemption. Private O'Connor wrote home to his wife in May 1945, "We came here to fight evil, and we did, but what's left behind is something else entirely. You should see them, Mary. The smallest ones hold your hand like they're afraid you'll disappear. They don't talk much, but when they do, they smile like the war never happened. I don't know if I've ever done anything good in my life, but helping them feels close." As Europe lay in ruins, the American presence in Hungary became a strange symbol of hope. The soldiers, once agents of destruction, found themselves building instead of breaking. For the orphans, they weren't conquerors. They were saviors, men from across the ocean who gave them names, food, and the first feeling of safety they'd ever known. Anna's transformation was the most remarkable. In the beginning, she refused to sleep indoors, choosing instead to curl up by the tent flap, eyes open through the night. She didn't trust walls. They'd fallen once, and in her mind they could fall again. But after weeks of patient care, she began to laugh, to translate for the younger children, and even to teach the soldiers Hungarian phrases. When Carter asked her what she wanted most, she didn't hesitate. "A family," she said in broken English, "not just safety." Family. Those words settled in his chest and never left. The months that followed were chaotic. The war officially ended, but the peace was messy. Hungary was carved up between Soviet and Western control, and the Americans knew their time there was running out. Orders came in June. The 26th Division was to withdraw westward toward occupied Germany. The children would be handed over to local authorities, but no one trusted what that meant. Rumors spread of Soviet units taking custody of orphaned children and disappearing them into state institutions. Carter and his men couldn't stomach the thought. They gathered in the command tent late one night, debating what to do. "If we leave them," O'Connor said, "they'll end up in some camp. Or worse, you've seen what the Russians do." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain on canvas. Then Carter spoke. "We're not leaving them." Not like this. When the convoy rolled out 2 days later, 5 extra passengers sat hidden under blankets in the back of a transport truck. Anna, her sister, and 3 other orphans. It was a violation of every order in the book, a reckless, compassionate act born from conscience. Carter knew the risk. If discovered, he'd face court-martial, but he couldn't turn his back on them. Crossing into Germany took 2 days of tense travel. The soldiers took turns sitting with the children, whispering reassurances they didn't fully believe. At night, the truck stopped in forests, lights off, engines silent. The children slept huddled together, guarded by men who'd once fought battles but now stood watch over sleeping innocents. When they finally reached the American sector near Nuremberg, Carter turned himself in. He told the officer everything. To his surprise, he wasn't arrested. The officer, Major Lewis, listened quietly before saying, "You did the right thing, Sergeant. Now let's make it official." Life in America was an adjustment that neither Carter nor the girls could have fully prepared for. The war had left scars deeper than any visible wound. The smallest things triggered memories: sirens, thunder, even the sudden crack of fireworks on the 4th of July. For months, Anna's sister would hide under the bed at the sound of airplanes overhead. Carter's neighbors helped where they could. Mrs. Thompson from down the street taught the girls how to bake cornbread. The local church raised funds for their schooling, but it was Carter's quiet patience that made the difference. He never raised his voice, never pushed too hard. He simply showed up every single day until trust began to grow roots. He learned Hungarian phrases at night, scribbling phonetic notes in the margins of a dictionary. "Jó reggelt," he'd say in the mornings. "Good morning." The girls giggled every time his pronunciation faltered, and that laughter became a kind of medicine. Slowly, the house filled with life again. By the summer of 1948, both girls were enrolled in school. They were the only Hungarians in their district, and though the first months were difficult, the townspeople embraced them. America was still raw from war, still healing from loss, but stories like theirs softened people's hearts. Veterans who'd once cursed their former enemies now found themselves mowing Carter's lawn, leaving gifts on the porch, stopping by to see how the little ones were doing. One afternoon, Carter received a letter from Sergeant O'Connor, who'd returned to Boston after the war. It read, "Bill, I read about you and the girls in the paper. Made me proud, brother. Made me remember why we fought in the first place. I think I'm going to do it too. There's a boy in Munich I can't stop thinking about. He's alone. I can't leave him there." And just like that, one act of compassion became a movement. Across the Atlantic, dozens of American servicemen began the long process of adopting orphans from war-torn Europe, Hungarian, German, Polish, and Czech children who'd lost everything. The media called it the silent rescue, a story that captured a nation still searching for meaning after years of global suffering. The United States government didn't know what to make of it. The bureaucracy lagged behind the human heart. Immigration laws weren't built for mercy, so the Army, the Red Cross, and various church organizations worked together to bend the rules until compassion could fit through the cracks. In 1948 alone, more than 60 European orphans were brought to America by their soldier fathers. The paperwork was messy, but the outcomes were miraculous. For the children, the adjustment was as emotional as it was cultural. They traded the grey rubble of Europe for the golden fields of the Midwest, the scent of burning ruins for the smell of apple pie cooling on windowsills. They learned English by listening to radio dramas and reading comic books. They memorized the Pledge of Allegiance with accents that turned heads at school assemblies. And though they carried memories that no child should bear, they also carried hope, because for the first time they had futures to imagine. Anna's first Christmas in America was something Carter would never forget. The snow fell heavy that December, blanketing the small Kansas town in silence. The girls helped decorate the tree with paper chains and handmade stars. That morning, Anna handed Carter a wrapped box. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden heart with the word Appa, father, engraved on it. Carter couldn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "You already gave me everything I ever needed, kiddo." The years passed, and the story of Carter's girls became part of local legend. Journalists visited, took photographs, and printed headlines that read, "From War to Home, the Hungarian sisters who found an American father. But behind the headlines was the quiet truth that every night, before turning out the lights, Carter still checked on them the way he had in that ruined schoolhouse years earlier. Some habits of war never faded. Meanwhile, in Europe, thousands of orphans remained in limbo, trapped in institutions, displaced person camps, or newly drawn Soviet borders. The contrast between those who'd found homes and those who hadn't became one of the most haunting moral legacies of the war's aftermath. Relief organizations cited the adoptions as proof that empathy could bridge nations. Hungarian newspapers began publishing translated articles about Carter and other American adopters, calling them Angyalok Amerikából, angels from America. But for every child who found a family, hundreds didn't. Anna never forgot that. As she grew older, she began writing letters to relief workers, urging them to help the children still trapped overseas. "If they can't all come here," she wrote, "then let's send them love where they are." Her words inspired a local fundraiser that shipped hundreds of care packages to Hungarian orphanages, boxes filled with toys, clothes and letters signed simply, "From your friends in Kansas." By 1953, Anna was 18. She graduated high school with honors and was accepted into a teaching college in Topeka. Her sister, now a lively teenager fluent in English, followed close behind. Carter attended every ceremony, sitting in the front row with pride burning behind his eyes. "They saved me more than I saved them," he told a reporter that year. "War teaches you how to destroy. Kids like them teach you how to live again." The story of Carter and the Kovacs sisters was retold across America for decades, each version a little different, but the heart always the same: mercy outlasting violence. It wasn't just one man's act of kindness. It became a quiet testament to a generation of soldiers who, after conquering tyranny, chose to build something gentler in its place. In 1965, a documentary titled "Children of Two Worlds" aired nationwide, featuring several of the war's adopted orphans, now adults living across America. Among them was Anna Carter, formerly Anna Kovacs, now a schoolteacher. Sitting in a sunlit classroom, surrounded by children, she said softly, "They took us from ruins and gave us a home. But what they really gave us was a reason to believe again. I teach because someone once taught me that kindness is stronger than war." As the camera lingered on her face, her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Behind her desk sat a framed photo of Sergeant William Carter in uniform, his arm around two young girls, taken the day they arrived in Kansas. In 1989, long after Carter's passing, Anna returned to Hungary for the first time. The country had changed, but the scars were still visible in the broken buildings and the quiet eyes of its people. She visited the ruins of her old schoolhouse, now overgrown with grass and silence. In her hand, she carried that same carved wooden heart she'd given her father decades earlier. She knelt, placed it gently on the ground and whispered, "Köszönöm, Apa," "Thank you, Father." As she stood, the church bells rang in the distance, echoing across a landscape that had once known only war. It was as if the world itself was answering back. By the late 1980s, stories like Anna's had become historical curiosities, small miracles overshadowed by the larger narratives of geopolitics and power. Yet, in small towns across America, those miracles had grown up, raised families, and lived out the quiet legacies of mercy. Many of the orphans adopted by American soldiers had gone on to become teachers, doctors, writers, and soldiers themselves. They carried with them fragments of two worlds, memories of hunger and fear balanced by the warmth of an unexpected home. Historians later called them the forgotten children of victory, a term that captured both their obscurity and their significance. They were living proof that compassion could survive amid devastation. A government report from 1991 identified over 130 European orphans adopted by U.S. servicemen between 1945 and 1950. Nearly all had become American citizens, integrated into local communities, and started families of their own. None returned to Europe permanently. Anna, now in her mid-50s, was invited to speak at a World War II remembrance ceremony in Washington, D.C. She almost declined. Public speaking was never her comfort, but something inside her insisted that she go. The event was held on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Veterans in faded uniforms filled the rows of chairs, their medals catching the morning light. Beside them sat children, grandchildren, and curious spectators who'd grown up with peace and could scarcely imagine the chaos their elders had endured. When her name was called, Anna approached the podium with trembling hands. She began softly, her accent still carrying traces of Hungary despite decades in America. 50 years ago, she said, I was a child who thought the world had ended. Then one man, an American soldier, taught me it hadn't. He didn't know my language, he didn't know my story, but he knew what mercy was. Her voice broke for a moment, and the crowd fell silent. He showed me that even in the ruins, love can rebuild what hate destroys. The applause that followed was long and standing. Among the audience were other adopted orphans. Some she hadn't seen since those early years in refugee camps. They embraced like long-lost siblings, the shared weight of memory binding them tighter than blood. Later that night, a journalist approached her for an interview. "Do you ever think about Hungary?" he asked. Anna smiled faintly. "Every day," she said, "but my home is here." My father made sure of that. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Hungary was undergoing its own transformation. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and old wounds were being reopened, examined, and finally healed. In Budapest, an exhibition titled Children of the Ruins displayed artifacts from orphanages and relief efforts after the war, photographs, letters, and records once buried in archives. Among them was a faded picture of 5 children in a schoolhouse near Gyor, taken by an American military photographer in April 1945. The caption read simply, "Rescued by U.S. soldiers." Visitors stood in silence before the image. To most, it was history. To Anna, who later visited that exhibition, it was her beginning. She stared at the photo for a long time, recognizing her own 13-year-old face staring back at her, skeletal, terrified, and yet alive. She traced the edge of the glass with her finger and whispered, "We made it." Her return to Hungary wasn't just a personal pilgrimage, it was the closing of a circle. She met with surviving relief workers, historians, and teachers who wanted to record her memories for a new generation. "Children today cannot imagine what we saw," one Hungarian historian told her. "They grow up in peace because you carried the memory of war far from here, and you turned it into hope." In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the war's end, a reunion was organized for the surviving orphans who'd been adopted by American soldiers. It was held in New York, attended by over 80 people from across the country. Men and women now in their 60s gathered to share stories that began in rubble and ended in redemption. Some had brought their children and grandchildren, Americans by birth, connected by a past none of them had lived through, but all of them benefited from. The event's organizer, a historian named Dr. Evelyn Ross, opened with a statement that echoed across the hall. "History remembers battles, not kindness, but it's the kindness that heals what battles break." One by one, The adoptees spoke. They remembered the fear of being found, the confusion of being loved by strangers, the slow realization that these soldiers, these men of war, had chosen to become fathers when the world needed them most. Anna spoke last. Her words carried the same quiet power that had filled the Lincoln Memorial years earlier. "When I came to America, I was still afraid of the dark," she said. "My father used to leave the hallway light on so I could sleep. He told me, 'The war's over now, honey. The dark can't hurt you anymore.' And he was right. But I think maybe the light he left on wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who needed to see that the enemy can become family, that mercy can rewrite the ending." A hush fell over the room. Then, one by one, the veterans present began to stand, followed by their families until everyone was on their feet, applauding not the horror of war, but the miracle of what came after it. In the years that followed, Anna worked closely with education programs focused on post-war reconciliation. She visited schools across the Midwest, telling her story to young students who stared in wide-eyed disbelief as she described the bombings, the hunger, the loss. "It sounds impossible, doesn't it?" she would say, but it happened. And that's why it matters. When asked why she continued to revisit those painful memories, she always gave the same answer: because forgetting is how it happens again. By the early 2000s, as the last of the World War II veterans began to pass, their adopted sons and daughters took it upon themselves to preserve their legacy. They founded an organization called Fathers of Mercy, dedicated to documenting the stories of American soldiers who had adopted war orphans from Europe and Asia. Their archives grew to include letters, photographs, and first-hand accounts, pieces of a moral history rarely told in textbooks. The organization's mission statement echoed Carter's own words: "We fought tyranny abroad, but mercy is how we win peace." Every year on Memorial Day, Anna attended the ceremony at Arlington. She would stand among the rows of white stones, searching for her father's name, etched into the marble. She always brought flowers, white lilies his favorite. Standing there, she'd whisper, "I'm still living the life you gave me." And though the air was still, she swore she could hear his voice in the wind, gentle and proud. "That's my girl." In her final years, Anna's story became part of a permanent exhibit at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Visitors could see her childhood photograph beside one of her and Carter on the day they reunited in Kansas. Beneath it was a simple inscription: "From ruins to family, a soldier's mercy." The exhibit drew thousands every year. Children would stop and stare at the photos, asking their parents how such things could happen. And the parents, often unsure of what to say, would simply whisper, "Because even in war, some people choose love." By 2010, Anna's health began to decline. Age had slowed her, but her spirit remained sharp as ever. She still kept her father's uniform jacket neatly folded in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, alongside the wooden heart she'd once carved. Every year, she would take them out on April 10th, the day they'd first met in that shattered schoolhouse in Gyor. She would hold the jacket to her face, breathe in the faint scent of wool and time, and whisper, "You found me when no one else did." That same year, she received a letter from a filmmaker producing a documentary about post-war adoptions. He wanted to include her story, using her father's letters and the footage from Children of Two Worlds. Anna agreed on one condition, that it wasn't just about her. "Tell all of them," she said. "Tell every child who was found, and every man who refused to walk away." When the film premiered in 2012, it opened with black and white footage of ruined cities, followed by a narrator's voice. In the aftermath of war, amid the ruins of Europe, compassion crossed oceans. Then came photos, of soldiers kneeling beside frightened children, of hands reaching across uniforms and rubble. The final scene showed Anna standing at her father's grave, placing the wooden heart on the headstone. Her voiceover, recorded a month before her passing, closed the film. He called me daughter. I called him father. And between those two words, the war finally ended. The film received international acclaim, screened at universities, history conferences, and memorial ceremonies. Survivors and descendants from across the globe wrote letters to the production team. One came from a man in Budapest who'd grown up in an orphanage Anna had helped fund decades earlier. He wrote, "My mother told me that when I was a boy, a woman in America sent packages with my name written in careful handwriting. She said that woman's kindness kept me alive. Thank you for telling her story." When Anna passed peacefully in her sleep in 2014, at age 82, her funeral was held in the same Kansas church that had once raised money to bring her and her sister to America. Hundreds attended, former students, neighbors, veterans, and their families. At the front of the church stood two flags, the Stars and Stripes, and the red, white, and green of Hungary. Beneath them lay a simple inscription on her headstone, Anna Kovács Carter, daughter of two nations, child of mercy. Her sister, still living, spoke at the service. "My father didn't just save us," she said softly. "He gave us the chance to save others. That's what mercy does. It multiplies." As she stepped down, a choir began to sing Amazing Grace. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. And when the last note faded, the world seemed to hold its breath, as if somewhere a soldier's spirit was finally at peace. Outside, the Kansas wind carried across the fields, soft and warm, whispering through the wheat. Somewhere out there, the children of those who'd once been enemies were now friends, neighbors, family, living proof that compassion could outlast even the darkest chapters of history. Years later, a new generation of historians began revisiting the post-war adoption movement. What they found wasn't just a story of rescue, it was a moral legacy. Documents from army archives revealed letters, petitions, and reports that had been buried for decades. The records told of men who'd risked their careers and defied orders to protect children who had nothing left. Some never made it through the bureaucracy. Some were court-martialed for disobeying. But others, like Carter, succeeded and changed lives forever. One historian, Dr. Lucas Meyer, summarized it best in his 2020 book, Fathers of Mercy. In a world that had been taught to dehumanize its enemies, these men redefined victory. They fought not just for the end of tyranny, but for the restoration of humanity. Their compassion was not a footnote to history, it was its redemption. That same year, a new memorial was unveiled in Washington, D.C., a bronze statue depicting an American soldier kneeling to lift a small child from rubble. At the base, the inscription read, "To those who saw a child instead of an enemy." During the dedication ceremony, among the crowd were dozens of descendants of the adopted orphans. Some carried old photographs, others small tokens, letters, medals, keepsakes passed down from fathers they'd never met but would never forget. A news crew captured one young girl, about 10 years old, tracing the engraved words with her fingers. Her mother, a granddaughter of one of the original Hungarian orphans, knelt beside her. "What does it mean?" the girl asked. Her mother smiled gently. "It means," she said, "that kindness won the war." The story of the Hungarian orphans spread anew through classrooms and social media. Teachers began using it as an example of moral courage, a reminder that war is not only fought with guns, but with choices. Podcasts, YouTube documentaries, and short films retold the story for younger audiences, viewers born long after the last veterans had passed, yet still searching for reminders of what humanity can be at its best. One such short film, released in 2023, opened with the same haunting image the reference story began with: smoke, ruins, and the cry of a child, and ended with Anna's voice saying, "Mercy is stronger than hate." It went viral, viewed millions of times across platforms, sparking thousands of comments from people moved by the story's message. "I watched this with my granddad," one user wrote. "He fought in World War II. He cried the whole time." The resurgence of the story inspired renewed academic interest, but also something deeper, personal reflection. Veterans' families wrote online about how their fathers had carried silent memories of similar encounters, children spared, fed, hidden, or protected in the chaos of occupation. "Maybe they didn't adopt," one man wrote, "but they remembered." And maybe that's enough, to remember that even war didn't erase their decency. Today, when you visit the World War II Memorial in Washington, you might find fresh flowers left not at the names of generals or battles, but beside the smaller plaque dedicated to the children of two nations. Among the names inscribed, there is Sergeant William Carter. Beneath it, he saw children, not enemies. Every year, on April 10th, a few visitors gather quietly around that spot. Descendants, students, strangers who learned the story online. They bring candles, drawings, sometimes small wooden hearts, and as the light fades, they share the story again. How one man, thousands of miles from home, refused to let war decide what humanity should mean. It's hard to imagine now how close those children came to disappearing into history. But because of a handful of soldiers who chose compassion over compliance, their lives became part of a larger truth. That redemption is not written in treaties or borders, but in the small, defiant acts of kindness that ripple through generations. If you stand there long enough, the wind carries through the memorial's stone arches, soft and low, like a voice from another time. You can almost hear it, the echo of a soldier whispering, "You're safe now, kiddo." The war's over, and maybe that's the real legacy of the Hungarian orphans, not just that they were saved, but that their story continues to save others. It reminds us that even when the world seems irreparably broken, it can still be rebuilt, one act of mercy at a time. And that wraps up today's story of Hungarian orphans who couldn't believe American soldiers adopted them after the war. From the rubble of Europe to the fields of Kansas, this story isn't just about history, it's about humanity. It's about how compassion outlived chaos and how one soldier's choice changed the lives of generations. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more untold histories of courage and kindness, and share this with someone who believes that even in the darkest times, good still wins. Tell us in the comments, what does mercy after war mean to you? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in hearts.